So anyway, I invite you to come forward and we will get going on this conversation. Susan, welcome.
Thank you.
What are you talking about?
Prayer.
Fabulous. Does she need this?
No, I've got like all sorts of things attached to it. But wait a minute, I need to turn it on.
Has anybody signed in?
Okay, can you, everybody hear me out? Okay. Thanks for coming. I'm going to be talking about the Sacred Heart today, which is one of my favorite subjects. It's exciting to me because it's such a rich symbol, and so I'm excited to share it with you. I want to start with a quotation from a guy named Charles Coulomb, who wrote an essay called "The Sacred Heart and the Anglican Patrimony." Okay, he says, for many of Anglican upbringing, the cultus of the Sacred Heart of Jesus seems a rather garlicky and ethnic sort of thing. Fine for Italians, Frenchmen, Spaniards, or at best Irishmen, but utterly unsuited for the more sophisticated. So many of the Sacred Heart pictures are effeminate. And things like the Auto League of the Sacred Heart, I looked this up, I swear to God it exists, it's like AAA for Catholics. The Auto League of the Sacred Heart, merely tacky. I can affirm that. In a word, it is so very Roman and utterly un-Anglican. And he goes on to say what a pity that is, because not only does the Sacred Heart actually have a long history in Britain and even in British Anglicanism, but more importantly, it's such a powerful symbol of God's love for us. And so it's a pity to sort of lay that aside and not use this as a way to comprehend the deep peace that we are invited into as God's beloved. Okay, so that's kind of where I want to go with this today. So I want to talk about, whoops. Okay, Amanda, why is this not? Okay, I'm going here, but I'm not going. Yeah, all right. Yes. So today what I want to do is talk about, look at some images of the Sacred Heart, because some of them are kind of benign and some of them are quite bizarre. And then I want to talk about the origins and evolution over time of this imagery. And then if we have time, we'll maybe reflect on some of the lessons that we can learn from this. But one thing I want to do before I go any further is mention this book, Sacred Heart, Gateway to God by Wendy Wright. If you were closer to it, you'd see how dog-eared and used it is and how much marginalia I put in it, because this is a wonderful introduction to the Sacred Heart tradition. And Wendy Wright does a great job of tracing it back. And so if you're at all interested in following up on this, it's a great place to start. So let me start by asking, next slide. Yeah. Who here was raised Roman Catholic? Okay, a few. So let me ask you, did your family do Sacred Heart devotions? Do you remember any, do you have any memories of this? No. No? No, okay. Probably because you're too young. I think everybody I saw raise their hand is a little too young. So I once put up an image of the Sacred Heart in a room full of Roman Catholics who were mostly like middle-aged and up. And the expressions on their faces, it was like I put up one of those, like a picture of one of those 1950s Jell-O mold salads. They all kind of went, oh God, I remember that. You know, and I was like, really? Because you know, the thing is that the Sacred Heart can be, you know, alienating to basically everyone. You know, Protestants because it's so Catholic. You know, Catholics of a certain age because they have those memories of Sacred Heart devotions, you know, with the family gathered around, and it was all kind of drippy and sentimental and actually at times almost kind of superstitious and transactional, you know, like if you do, you know, these devotions, then Jesus will give you this and this and this. I mean, it's almost magic, right? And so, but younger Catholics, because that's so pre-Vatican II, you know, nobody relates to that anymore. So it's been around a really long time, and I want to trace that history, but in being around for so long, it's got a lot of baggage attached to it. Fortunately, at least in this regard, I was not raised Roman Catholic or basically anything. And so I don't have that baggage. And I look at it just without any of those assumptions. And it's, I found it to be really powerful. So let's look at some of these images. So, so the Sacred Heart is a great symbol. Well, actually, sorry, Amanda, let's just go back one. The sort of Aryan Jesus who looks like he's just come from a mani-pedi, you know, I mean, like that's just kind of gross, right? But that's a lot of, like, if you do a Google image search on the Sacred Heart, you see a lot of this. Okay, so let's look at the Sacred Heart as an image for children. Okay, so you have like this kind of sometimes quite anatomically realistic, sometimes not, image of a heart, you know, surrounded by a crown of thorns sort of digging into it. And then you've got like wings and it's, you know, there's a wound and there's blood pouring out of it and flames shooting out the top. I mean, like, it's wild, right? It's the kind of thing that would probably give kids nightmares, I would assume. You know, and here's one you could have on your coffee mug, same basic themes, only with a cross on the top, something blood pouring out the bottom, you know, like, yeah, so some of them get pretty weird. Let's go on and look at some that are a little bit more inviting, I think. You know, here's one where the rivers of living water are flowing out of the heart. And so I think that's quite beautiful. And also this other one where it's just the heart is a place of sort of this radiance and this warmth and all. Now, some people, moving on, find that it makes a great tattoo subject. So they can be extremely subtle. You can just have a heart with like a circle around it that just kind of is suggestive of the Sacred Heart. Now, the one on the right here on the slide is more detailed, but still small enough to fit on a finger. But if you're really committed to this whole idea, you can. I kind of see this one. I saw several of these and different ones. So like, this isn't just one crazy person, but yeah, I kind of feel like this is the whole of salvation history. This is basically the Easter vigil right here. You know, like you can just take off your shirt and like, this is it. You know, we can all go home now. Yeah, that's a little weird. So let's go to a more basic version of it. All right. So it's a symbol. Symbols are supposed to communicate. They're supposed to speak to us. So what does this say to you? This is not a rhetorical question. I want to know, like, when you look at this, what do you see in this symbol and what does it say to you?
It says Jesus sacrificed himself for us.
Jesus sacrificed himself for us. So like, you see that where? How?
Like the thorn, the circle of thorns, the cross.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just think the heart, the love that is represented.
Right, so you're connecting the fire of the Holy Spirit, right? Okay, so the crown of thorns and the what was it? The cross on the top, you know, so all of this, the bleeding, yeah. So it speaks of suffering, doesn't it? Sacrifice. Yeah.
For love.
For love, though, that's the key connection, right? It's for love. Anybody else? What else do you see in this? Yes.
This probably isn't what I'm supposed to see, but and I've seen the Sacred Heart symbol, but I've never seen. It looks like a Nazi concentration camp.
Ooh.
To me, because thorns on barbed wire have the same purpose. There's a fire coming out, which, you know, once the thought of Nazis, it's like, oh, there was, you know, death by fire, people's hearts are broken and pierced. Many people were sacrificed in that place, and it was tragic.
I love that. So if anybody, maybe the people on Zoom can hear that very well, it's about, you see an image that suggests the Nazi concentration camps. And actually, in some of the images of the Sacred Heart, the crown of thorns is barbed wire, you know, and it is really suggestive of that. And so I love that as a way of seeing into the symbol something that isn't necessarily, you know, like not maybe part of the basics, but it's this is where you get by meditating on it and seeing, you know, like where else does this take me? I love that. Joy.
The top where the flame and the cross are reminds me of a perfume bottle.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
like that little thing that, and just the fragrance of Christ. Right?
Yeah, so the fragrance, the beauty, I mean, like what it reminds me of is the tongues of fire at Pentecost, right? Yeah, the Holy Spirit, somebody said, right? Yes.
What is the picture? I think of water cooling things, but it looks like a picture on top. What is it supposed to be?
I mean, you know, some of them are really super anatomically correct. So they'll have like the, you know, the aorta coming out of it, you know, and some of them are just very stylized, but, you know, it just really depends. So you see all different variations on the theme. So I don't know, maybe they were sort of just going with the heart and stopped there because they had to stop somewhere, you know, time to move on to flames, you know.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Yes.
I wanted to mention something. Did anyone here ever go to the House of Blues?
The House of what?
The House of Blues. It was a nightclub. They used this as
House of Blues. Ooh.
Yeah, they used the Sacred Heart as their symbol, and it was kind of like giving out like electricity from music. I thought they did a nice job with it. Anyway, it reminds me of that whenever I see it. It was a huge thing in the 90s.
Yeah, okay. It's funny where it turns up. I once saw Sacred Heart chocolates on sale at Whole Foods. I kid you not, I kid you not. And I was with my friend Edie and we were both looking at this going, what is this supposed to mean? You know, okay. So this is a symbol that, as I've suggested, and as your comment suggested, it speaks powerfully of a love that goes to the limits, you know, that's passionate, like of God's passionate love for us, that will enter into the limits of what Robert Barron calls the limits of God forsakenness, you know, in the sacrifice, because that's how powerful the love is. I think this really speaks to me because I believe that what people actually want in their deepest sort of self is to be fully known and fully loved at the same time. But we're really scared a lot of the time that if we're fully known, we won't be fully loved, we'll be rejected, right? And so this speaks to us of like an omniscient God who knows us better than we know ourselves. And yet, and maybe not in spite of that, but maybe because of that, loves us fiercely and passionately. And that's why I think this is so powerful. Okay, so let's look at where this came from and talk about the Sacred Heart tradition. It really goes all the way back to the Passion itself, okay? And the great care with which the disciples attended to his body after Jesus died. Not because they were expecting resurrection, they weren't expecting resurrection, but because they just cared about his body. And so the deposition from the cross is a frequent theme in art, right? So on the left, there's a picture of one by Fra Angelico as a detail. And the tenderness with which the Virgin is holding her dead son, you know, is very emotional, evocative. Caravaggio is, Caravaggio's not like that, but anyway, you know, you see the taking down from the cross and the careful handling of the body. I think maybe the most well-known deposition from the cross is probably Michelangelo's Pietà. You know, and it's so magnificent. And actually, this is the one that he did when he was just 24 years old. You know, I mean, just to imagine. And then there's one that he did toward the end of his life. If you'll Google, you know, Michelangelo Pietà, you'll see it, and it's very heartfelt. It's very he puts himself in it as Nicodemus, and it's quite beautiful. I would definitely encourage you to look at that. But I mean, look at her sorrow, you know, and look at his deadness. I think this is just amazing. And I was fortunate enough to see this before it was surrounded by glass, because somebody attacked it and hacked off an arm or a foot or something in the 70s. So one of the things about the passion narrative especially in John's gospel, is that you get this statement by the evangelist that blood and water poured forth from the wound in his side. And the evangelist makes a really big deal of it. Like, the one who saw this knows it's true and testifies, and we know his testimony is true. And and I used to think, like, why are you making such heavy weather out of this? I mean, like, would you not expect that blood would come out of a wound in the side caused by a lance? And, the water, I mean, if you want to understand where the water came from, Google pericardial effusion. Okay, so probably the stress and the injuries that he had already incurred before death would have caused fluid to build up around the heart. And so, I mean, it's quite natural that blood and water would pour out, but this has been interpreted in really interesting ways. Like, so from the very beginning, the earliest church fathers talked about how the blood and the water were sacramental images. They represented, the Eucharist and baptism. And so, so that's pretty cool. But also they talked about how the birth of the church, like through the sacraments, the church was born in that. The church was taken out of Jesus' side, and it calls up the image of Eve being taken out of the side of Adam, okay, in one of the Genesis accounts, right? And so Eve is taken out of Adam's side. Adam's side split open by God, and Eve is created out of the rib that's removed, and she's to be his bride. So remember the hymn, "The Church is One Foundation," so it says, yeah, no, I do remember the words, but from heaven he came and sought her to be his holy bride. And so that's kind of where that idea first came from, is the idea that brides are born out of side wounds, and that's going to be really important. So at the very, very beginning, there was a lot of emphasis on Jesus' body, but in the early centuries after the death and resurrection of Christ, the church was really focused more on his divinity than his humanity. And the reason for that is because they had to make sense of, like, who is this? How do we account, in the context of a radically monotheistic religion, how do we account for someone who is supposed to be divine? Because in Jesus' own speech, he talked about himself as being sent by the Father, right? So that speaks of separation, like they're two distinct persons. But then he says, the Father and I are one. And so, like, how do we understand that? And the church fought it out and created whole classes of heretics, while they decided whose version was gonna come out on top, right? And so eventually established an orthodoxy, which we recite in the creeds. And I'm told that kids coming up in like confirmation class will ask, well, how come Jesus gets all this time in the creeds? And like the Father sort of mentioned at the beginning, and that's cool, but the Holy Spirit hardly gets anything. And then there's Jesus this, Jesus that. Well, it's because they didn't know what to make of him. Far less straightforward than the other persons of the Trinity. So like there was all this creed crafting that went on and lots of battles and stuff. So they were really focused on what to make of Jesus' divinity. But eventually they established, as I say, an orthodoxy, and it was a like straightforward, this is what the church is going to teach, this is what we're going to accept. Which doesn't make it easy on the rational mind, because Trinity, right? I mean, like, that's not so easy to get your mind around, and it's not really supposed to be. But what it meant was that after that, the church could kind of turn to considering Jesus' humanity, okay? Like once the divinity thing was settled, it was time to think about his humanity. And so, another, let's move forward. Another thing that was going on by the Middle Ages, of course, is the Crusades. And so crusaders were going to the Holy Land and visiting the places where Jesus had actually walked, and lived and died and been buried and all of that. And so rather than this sort of kind of abstract divine person. They were starting to think more about his actual humanity. And so, and the suffering that went with that humanity. And so medieval mystics sought to mystically enter into that suffering, that passion experience of Christ. And so on the left slide, you see here, St. Francis is mystically sort of placed himself in the crucifixion. And so look how close his face is to the side wound. Okay, the side wound becomes terribly important. I'll get to that in a second. But there's other images of various saints who are actually kissing the wound or even nursing from the wound, which is kind of weird. You know, I know, ew, right? The ew factor, but this idea of it, like entering into the passion so that you can actually be there and share in it, that became really important. So much so that this other slide on the right is also of St. Francis of Assisi, and it recounts, this is by Giotto, and it recounts a vision that he had toward the end of his life. About 2 years before he died, and Francis was praying in solitude on a mountain, Monte Alverna, and he had this vision in which he saw an angel, a six-winged seraph, and the seraph from his own person shoots these beams of light to Francis. I don't know how well you can see them, but the beams of light imprint upon Francis the wounds of the passion. Okay, so this is the first recorded instance of the stigmata. And you know, I used to think that, you know, well, you could believe that or you could not believe it. You know, like probably a lot of people don't, probably a lot of historians would not, you know, but actually there's quite a lot of people who do believe this. Now the question is, was it some kind of psychological event or was it a divine, you know, sort of thing? And but I can tell you that if you go to Assisi, you can see the little slippers that Claire made for Francis because they hurt, you know, his feet hurt from these wounds, and the little the cloth bandage that he wore over the wound in his side and so on. And actually he kept them all covered up and they weren't revealed to the world until he died. And as they were sort of carrying him around, they took all that off, and so people can see the wounds. But the point is that the wounds were really important and they were venerated by medieval mystics, not just Francis, but plenty of others. And so there's, you know, the idea is that medieval mystics were longing to be in union with Christ, and not just the exalted, glorified Christ, but also the suffering Christ, okay? And sometimes this became a little bit pathological, okay? So, you know, like flagellation, self-flagellation, and I don't know how to say, I don't know the word in English, but cilicio is the word in Italian for, like, I think it's cilice or something like that, for those kinds of like garters and belts that have prongs in them, spikes in them, and you know, like cinch them tight and cause yourself all kinds of pain for penitential reasons. Francis wasn't really into that, but plenty of others were. And you know, so it got kind of weird and pathological, but there are healthier reasons for wanting to enter into the suffering of Christ that I think we can more easily relate to than all of that. And let me put it this way, like if somebody you really love is suffering, a spouse, a child, okay, is suffering a lot, then, you know, you want to be in it with them, don't you? I mean, like, you don't want to just say, well, gosh, I'm really sorry that you're going through this. See you next week, you know? I mean, like, you want to stay. I mean, like, parents talk about wishing that they could take it on themselves, you know? I wish so much that, you know, I could take my child's cancer and let them, you know, be healthy, you know? And so we really want to be in it with people when we love them that much. And so these mystics were madly in love with God, you know, and they wanted to enter into that's, you know, the glory, yes, but also the suffering. So like if Jesus is on the cross, then that's where I want to be as well. And in fact, when Francis received the stigmata, what he was praying was, let me know the suffering that you experienced in your passion, and let me know also the love that drove you to go through with it, you know? And so that is a very sort of terse statement of what this was all about. But there's more here. These mystics saw the wounds of Christ as a refuge, a place of intimacy and peace with God. Okay, so there's a bit in the Song of Songs, which is up here, but you probably can't see it all that well. And it says, "Oh my dove." This is the Song of Songs, of course, is a story of lovers, right? And so, the lover is saying here to the beloved, "Oh my dove, in the clefts of the rock," the split open part in the rock, okay, "in the covert of the cliff, let me see your face. Let me hear your voice. For your voice is sweet and your face is lovely." So the cleft in the rock is the place where the beloved is invited to into safety, into a place where she's protected, you know? And so we've kept that imagery into the modern age, somewhat modern age, in a hymn that is that we don't sing very often, but is probably familiar to most of us. It was written in 1763 by an Anglican priest who rejoiced in the name Augustus Toplady.
Oh.
Poor guy. But anyway, we know this hymn, and the tune is Toplady. I'm just really trying to keep images out of my head there. Rock of Ages, what? Cleft for me, right? Split open a cleft for me. Let me what? Rock of Ages, cleft for me. Let me hide myself in thee, right? Let me hide myself in thee. So that idea of the cleft in the rock being a place where you can hide, a refuge when everything around you is just turning to crap, okay? So it's a place you can escape to, that place of intimacy. So the wounds became a place that you could go to, that you could enter into. Now, a little bit more recently, okay, a lot more recently, here's Pope Francis in a homily that he gave on prayer in 2018. He said this: "It may sound a bit medieval," totally correct there. "It may sound a bit medieval, but when we pray, let's try to enter through Jesus' wounds and arrive deeper and deeper to his heart. Enter into his wounds and contemplate the love in his heart for you and you and you and me and everyone." So he gets that, you know, he gets that. So the wounds become a way into the heart, into the place of refuge. And here's Wendy Wright on that. Just going to quote a section from the book. She says, "The entryway to God's most secret life is the Sacred Heart. It was devotionally, or actually she's talking about the wound in the side here, I believe. It was devotionally speaking only a short step inward from the side wound to the heart. That organ was to become the supreme symbol of the loving intimacy between creator and creatures. Medieval Christians moved deeper and deeper into the body through the side wound into the divine human heart, where the mystery of a love that poured itself out in death could be explored." So there's that notion of sacrifice again, right? That notion of love that goes that far, that goes to the nth degree. So the heart of Christ is a place of intimacy, and it goes back to right back to the Last Supper, which is represented in this icon where the beloved disciple is reclining on Jesus' breast, right next to his heart. And you know, I know we tend to have little debates in this parish about who the beloved disciple was, but it really doesn't matter, because it's me and it's you and it's all of us, right? We are the beloved disciple, and that, I think, is what we're meant to understand here. So right from the beginning, reposing at Jesus' heart is associated with belovedness. Okay, now here's something I don't want to spend a lot of time on, but just to quickly cover it. The devotion to the Sacred Heart was popularized over the centuries by a few key people. Francis de Sales and Jean de Chantal were two whose spirituality was entirely built around the heart, okay? And they founded a community called the Visitation. It would later become a religious order for women, you know, with vows and enclosure and everything, but it wasn't really meant to be that at the beginning, and I don't have time to go into that story. But they established the heart as, you know, as sort of the center of their spirituality. And then a Visitation nun, so by this time it's actually become an order, a Visitation nun, and this is wrong here, should be Margaret Mary Alacoque, but I do that every time. She's represented in the picture on the right. So she had a series of visions. She was a visitation nun who had a series of visions in which Christ appeared to her, offered his heart, okay, encouraged her to spread this devotion. But her community didn't really like her much. They thought she's kind of a weirdo, you know, and her mother superior didn't really think she was very worth much to the community. But then she left, another one came, and also Margaret Mary acquired a Jesuit sort of champion. And so together they really worked on spreading this, and it became like so widespread that the heart actually became like the symbol of France, and like we're dedicating France to the Sacred Heart, you know, and we'll consecrate the whole world to the Sacred Heart. I don't really know what that means, you know, practically speaking, but it became political, you know, like it in time it sort of devolved into this reactionary symbol of monarchical France against the revolution, and you know, like all this stuff. I mean, it acquired, as I say, lots of baggage. And so, you know, with Vatican II, it kind of like went the way of most of the other old devotions, but more recently there have been calls to revive it. So like, I don't know how many of you know who James Martin is. He's a Jesuit who is known for being very active in trying to get the Catholic Church to be more inclusive of LGBTQ people. And so he's been saying, this is a message we need to hear. Let's bring this back. Maybe not in the old ways, but maybe in new ways. We still need this because it speaks to our belovedness in God, and that's something we need now. Okay, let's just go back then to the idea of refuge. Don't we all need places of refuge from time to time? I mean, it could be a need as small as my mind is buzzing and I really need to get back to sleep, so I'll go to my happy place, you know? Or it can be as big as, oh my God, you know, I'm worried about the people I love falling ill, you know, I'm worried about the planet, I'm worried about the country. I mean, like, you know, these are all things that are pretty much at the forefront of our consciousness these days. And so, you know, whether we just want to quiet a buzzing mind or, you know, we're facing serious threats, we all need a refuge sometimes. So here's my question to you. Where do you go? If not to the Sacred Heart? I mean, like, where do you go for refuge? I mean, you know, hopefully, you know, it might involve God somehow. Okay, but if it's not like through the Sacred Heart, let's say, like, where are your places of refuge? Like, how do you get to a place of peace? Again, not a rhetorical question. And anybody who's on, do we have anybody on Zoom? No, we don't. Okay, so not a rhetorical question. Where are your places of refuge? Where do you go? How do you get there?
Well, I find a place of refuge in yoga,
Mm-hmm.
practicing those movements and the devotion of it.
Tell me what that's like, because I'm not a yoga person.
Oh, gosh. So as you move through the different asanas, the positions, and as they get harder and harder, your mind becomes more focused and less scattered. And pretty soon, your body is moving.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you finish that, your body and your mind kind of part again. And I find my mind then goes off into its usual spinning.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have the period of rest called Shavasana, where you can kind of integrate the focus you had when your body was working hard,
Mm-hmm.
and you can bring your mind back into your body for calm.
I love that. I would assume that the more difficult positions, whatever you call them, force you into the present moment.
Exactly. Yeah, that's
Because,
the point of them.
yeah. That's really cool, because I actually think that it kind of parallels something that I think about the Sacred Heart, or you know, any kind of repose of peace in God, which is that we can go to that place and find that refuge. We can't stay there all the time though, because, you know, stuff's going on, right? And we have to attend to it. But although I don't think we can live in it, I think we can live from it, you know? And so that when stuff hits the fan, we can go, let me just recall my basic place of peace. Yeah, so yoga, what else? Yeah.
I find it kind of the opposite of the focus you're talking about. When I run, I'm present mentally, but I'm unable to analyze. Like I can't engage in deep analytical thought when I'm running. And so it's a chance for my mind to stop, you know, and relax almost. And when I come to, you know, when I stop running, I'm just completely energized and you know, I'm refreshed. And so that's a refuge for me, because to me, the analytical part of my mind is the damaging part.
Yeah.
It's the one that damages me.
I was going to ask if, is that not a good thing to lose that analytical
It's
bit for a
good for
while?
me.
Yeah, yeah. You know, my husband was a runner until he stopped being able to run because of his hip. But he had an injury one time years and years ago, and he couldn't run, and he hadn't yet taken up cycling. So he just was a nutcase. I mean, he was just like, he didn't have his normal refuge, his normal escape from the everyday. And I think he was like the sociology department chair at that time. So he really seriously needed a refuge. Like, he was just in that case for a while there, which he realized. But I saw you nodding your head while she was talking about.
Yeah, it was the same emotion, but it's cooking for me.
Oh,
So
yeah.
If I go into the kitchen, I feel like I can just completely zone out. Like no one's allowed in the kitchen when I'm there. I have a plan and I have my ingredients, and I'm really focused on what's in front of me and being understanding I'm almost like I'm just thinking about ingredients and process and putting stuff together, and then at the end I feel like I created something.
Yeah.
And it feels very satisfying that I did that. And then I get to give it to others who enjoy it. But it is a place where I feel completely helped.
I mean, it's a prayer, really, isn't it? I mean, I love cooking for those same kinds of reasons. I don't know that I get quite as, I don't know, maybe quite as focused and escaped as maybe you do. But one of the things I love about cooking is that, you know, I had a lengthy career as a teacher, and you know, with cooking, as you say, you have actual results right in front of you, like before the end of the day, you know, whereas with teaching, you never know. I mean, you throw stuff out there and you hope for the best, but you never know if it does anything, right? And so to actually work with your hands and create something you can see and you can taste and you know right away, you know, is this any good, or should I throw it into the lake? Yeah, that's very satisfying, Kelly.
Places of refuge are very nature. So like going for a walk or a run in the forest or even by the water, but something where I'm almost overwhelmed by nature, God's physical nature, and it's really quiet and almost a little isolated. So it's my place for refuge.
Yeah, I love being next to water. There's just something about it, right? Any others? Remember when Dwight preached on All Saints Sunday a couple of weeks ago about being able to live in uncertainty with equanimity? Remember that sermon? He talked about the peace that surpasses understanding. I like to think of this as the peace that makes no sense, okay, given whatever's going on outside. And so, you know, a happy place can get us back to sleep, and I'm all for getting back to sleep. But if it's, you know, the kind of peace that Dwight was talking about goes deeper than that. And it makes me think of Julian of Norwich, that mystic from the 15th century, 14th and 15th century, who was the first woman to write a book in English. And she, from her book comes the phrase that people quote all the time, and all will be well, and all will be well, and all manner of thing will be well, you know? And so my experience is that when you get down into this place of peace, where you're really experiencing that peace that makes no sense, then it's impossible to doubt that, you know? It's impossible to doubt what Julian said, because you just know that whatever happens, all will be well. My dad called this morning. My dad has just moved into assisted living. He was vaccinated and he got COVID anyway. And then he had a stroke, and, you know, like I've been attending to him for the last month or so. he called this morning and he said, I don't know, I'm upset because I don't know what's going on. And I said, well, what is it, Daddy? And he said, well, where's Nancy? My mom's name. Where's Nancy? I don't know where she is. Is she back at Santa Rosa Beach? And like, that's where his house is. And he's like, I don't know what's happening. And I had to tell my father that my mother is dead and has been for a few years, you know? And so like, that's not something anybody really wants to do, right? Nevertheless, I found myself being able to do that with pretty decent equanimity, you know? And it's the kind of thing where you think, like, I'm not so smart that I know how to conjure that up. But honestly, just spending time in that place of refuge, I think it kind of establishes itself, you know, so that when the stuff hits the fan, there you are with your equanimity, not knowing how that happened. You know, it's a mystery. It's kind of miraculous, but I do think we can live from that place, you know? Remember a few years ago also how Dwight would ask the question, how is it with your soul? You know, and he would ask that in all kinds of spaces. And so this makes me think of another great hymn that we also don't seem to ever sing. And I won't sing it either because I don't want y'all to leave just yet. Soon, I think, but not quite yet. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul, right? So that sense that whatever happens, God has got it, you know, God has got this, and I can be at peace. So, you know, there's all sorts of layers of meaning to the Sacred Heart, and we don't have time to go into them in detail, but boy, it's really interesting stuff. But we talked about this. We have the crown of thorns, which speaks of suffering, the wound, a broken heart that's being offered to us. God makes God's self vulnerable by issuing us an invitation that we have the freedom to refuse. And that just blows my mind, right? If you're all powerful, you know, and you create a bunch of people, you know, and you create them to be in a relationship of love, but yet you give them the freedom to refuse that relationship. That is just amazing to me. The blood speaks of how costly it is. The fire speaks of God's passion, the passion with which God pursues us. So this is all about our belovedness. So another question to you is, does this resonate with you at all? Like, you might be thinking, yeah, I've always thought this, or no, this is still a little too weird for me. Or something in between there. Does this attract you? Do you hear this and sort of perk up inside, or no?
The idea of suffering to be, you know, to feel close to God is dated. Do you know what I mean? It feels like that was a way that, you know, this kind of sadism aspect of religion was very mystic.
Yeah.
Very 1800s or 1500s or whatever it was. Like now, I feel like we've moved ahead of this. We've found different ways to express our adoration and to explore this person. Right. I mean, I don't know how other people feel, but the suffering thing is not, I don't connect with it.
I'm engaged really with the discussion on the wound, and the acknowledgement of the wound is the way, I think of a parent giving a child things that cost them.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what God has given to us. And our acknowledgement and fully taking ownership of that parental unit, that self-sacrifice for us is an enriching way the child really values the parent for God. And I love that engagement. So not taking on the rule that we have to wound ourselves, but acknowledging parental.
Yeah, I mean, the more you love somebody, the less you want to give them cheap, tacky stuff, right? You want to give them something costly and beautiful. But you're right. I mean, I think that what we've moved away from is self-inflicted suffering, and most of us know that, like, life gives us enough. We can work with that, right? Like, you know. Yes.
I think of it as the guilt, like Catholic guilt, where feels very, it feels like what I was raised with as, grown up Catholic. And even me as a parent, I don't want my child to see me suffer. I don't basically say, I'm suffering for all the things I'm giving you. I want them I want them to feel the love and to have that as a basis, a foundation for them to kind of grow. So it does feel dated. But that's just because I think it's because I kind of grew up with that type of symbol.
Yeah, and one of the things that was so that became kind of toxic about this was like when it was presented to children, like, if you misbehave again, like if I catch you with your hand in the cookie jar, or you yank the cat's tail, you pierce the heart of Jesus, and his blood is flowing all over the place, and like I'm like, that was definitely toxic. I mean, one of the things I really appreciated about my mother is she never acted like being a mom was a big sacrifice. I mean, she had a blast, and not all mothers are able to do that, but I liked that. So I do connect to what you're saying. Like, you want to see the love. You don't want your children to see the sacrifice, but maybe when they're grown-ups, it might be better for them to see it.
I mean, I see it now because I'm a parent.
Yeah.
I see my mom sacrifice now because I'm a parent.
Right.
I didn't see it until I became a parent.
Right. Yes.
I think that's often true in retrospect. You see the difference. One of the hardest things too, though, is you love your child and you try to do all you can for this child, and then you have to let it go.
Oh, yes.
And when you let it go, that can be really, really hard. And to see them making their mistakes. God allows us to make our mistakes. He gave us free will, which is really hard.
Oh, can you just imagine how tempting it would be to go, no. I mean, like when you're watching a horror movie and you want to go, don't go down that hallway, right? I mean, I wonder if God feels like that. If this doesn't resonate, if this imagery doesn't tell you about your belovedness in God, find something that does and pursue it, because this is the core, pun intended, core being Latin for heart. Okay, this is the core of the Christian message. Let me close with a short thing from Henry Nouwen, who said a lot of beautiful things, but one of them was this: I leave home every time I lose faith in the voice that calls me the beloved. Let me read that one more time. I leave home every time I lose faith in the voice that calls me the beloved. So if the Sacred Heart doesn't talk to you about your belovedness in God, then figure out what does, go for that, spend time meditating on it, go deep into it, because this is the Christian message. Once we grasp our own belovedness, then the corollary becomes clear. Not only are we beloved in God, but so is everybody else. That's Christianity right there, done. And that's our forum for a day. Done. Thanks for coming.
Sing us off too.
Yeah. You gonna sing us out?
You so don't want me to do that. You really don't want me to do that. I promise.